Thank you, Andrea, and thank you for being here. It might creep up to 7 minutes if that's okay, but I shall give a brief overview of some of the issues. And I come at this as a business person, as an entrepreneur, used to writing business plans and reading business plans, and that's the starting point really, because it took me only a few hours to go through the command paper that came out in March of last year to realise that the business case for HS2 doesn't stack up. So it was gratifying to find that the Transport Select Committee came to much the same conclusions 20 months later, albeit with a headline press release that said that there was a good case for high-speed rail, but then devastating criticisms of the case for HS2 specifically. And there's a leaflet that hopefully you've been given as you came in this pack, 10 good reasons to think again on High Speed 2. And I want to condense that down to 5 reasons to give a sort of summary of some of the key issues before handing over to Steve on the environment. And I'm hopeful that Jeffrey Robinson will join us and then to the floor. So 5 reasons. First of all, the Transport Select Committee say that the case for HS2 is inflated. The TSCs say that there should be a lower value allocated to time savings in the business case, which is obvious because people now, and this wasn't true 10 years ago, but now people are productive on trains. And so saving time doesn't translate into productivity benefits. And that's important because the time-saving element of the cost-benefit case is 40% of the benefits, so it makes a big difference. And furthermore, the TSC have asked that the environmental costs are included in a revised business case. And the impact of all of that is first, in relative terms, that will tend to favour the Heathrow hub route over the current route, and secondly, in absolute terms, making those changes will destroy the already very shaky case for HS2. We have calculated that the net benefit ratio is only 0.5, 50p benefit for every pound invested, and that has been independently verified by a team led by Vicky Price. The second thing I'd like to say is that the TSC have concluded that the carbon case for HS2 doesn't stand up to scrutiny. But I'm not going to say any more because I know that Steve is going to pick that up. The third thing that I want to say is that the TSC says it's not clear that HS2 will reduce the north-south divide. Well, of course HS2 will not reduce the north-south divide. Even the Department for Transport say that 73% of the jobs will actually be in London, not in the Midlands or the north. And most economists have said that when a weaker city is linked to a stronger city, it's the stronger city that benefits. The capital flow will be from Birmingham and from Manchester and Leeds to London, not the other way round. And there's more information on that in your packs, information on the issue of the north-south divide. And I think this is borne out by the evidence. The unemployment rate in Greater Lille has increased relative to the rest of France since the arrival of the TGV. And in Ashford, house prices have actually fallen relative to the rest of Kent since the arrival of HS1. So there is no empirical evidence for the kind of benefits that the Department for Transport are pushing. And even Lord Digby-Jones has stressed that the only impact on the Midlands of High Speed 2 will be that Birmingham becomes a dormitory town for London. Is that what we want? That our great cities of the Midlands and the North become cheap suburbs of London rather than stand up on their own 2 feet, competing on their own terms with comparable areas in Europe? Surely we want them to do that, to stand up on their own 2 feet and compete rather than cling to the tailcoats of London. We need jobs in the Midlands and the North, and I don't need to tell you that. We know that, and we'll know more tomorrow of some of the spending commitments that the Chancellor will make. But spending nearly £1 billion in this Parliament simply on planning HS2 will do nothing to create jobs and growth, other than paying for a few consultants. And if the line is ever completed, the Taxpayers Alliance have concluded that it will cost 4 jobs for every 1 job that is created. The fourth point I want to make is that the Transport Select Committee say that the alternatives have not been properly considered. In the command paper, HS2 was compared with a do minimum case, which was completely unrealistic and served mainly to inflate the benefits in the BCR yet further. I won't go into the details of why that is, but it's about 20% of the benefits, and it's to do with uncrowding benefits that are impossible. But the most scurrilous aspect of the whole HS2 debate is this myth that we are about to run out of capacity on the West Coast Main Line. We have been trying for about a year, I think, to get information from Virgin Trains on what the peak period loading actually is on Virgin Trains from Euston to Birmingham and Manchester. And we've not been able to get that. So we have appointed an independent market research company to look at that. Now, I'm going to be slightly coy about the figures because the report, I'll see the first draft, I think, tonight, and it will be out probably in the next week or so. But let me tell you, we're talking roughly, if you exclude trains to Milton Keynes, which I'll come back to, we're talking roughly 50% loading on trains in the peak time between 4:30 and 7 o'clock from Euston. So they are not overloaded. The two areas that are overloaded, first of all, are Milton Keynes, at over 100% from the figures that I've seen. There is a problem with Milton Keynes, as we have been saying for quite a long time, and it cannot wait till 2026 when HS2 might relieve it. We have an urgent problem. There is a solution. It means dealing with Ledburn Junction, which is 243 million, and it's in effect, if you're not a train specialist, it's a train flyover which separates the bottleneck where slow and fast lanes cross. That can be dealt with. Doing that will enable us to double the number of fast commuter trains between Euston, Milton Keynes and Northants. The other issue, of course, is the 703 out of Euston, the Faircliff issue. You save £100 by waiting for the train after 7 o'clock, it's cheaper. And it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to spend possibly 45 billion of taxpayers' money, that's the Taxpayers Alliance calculation of total net cost, to relieve that particular problem. There are easier ways of dealing with it. You know, this is not rocket science. Simply increasing the number of standard class carriages from 5 to 9 doubles the number of standard class seats. Now, if you're worried about my arithmetic there, the answer is that you don't have to replicate the shop and the cab and the disabled loo and so on, which is why from 5 to 9 actually doubles the number of seats. So 100% increase simply by train lengthening, and 2 of those carriages are already promised for next year. And if that isn't enough, then we can actually treble the capacity, standard class capacity of the West Coast Main Line, by dealing with a further 4 bottlenecks in addition to Ledburn Junction. Train lengthening is not very disruptive and it's very inexpensive. The bottlenecks are also totally different from the West Coast Main Line upgrade. They're very specific. That makes a great deal more sense. So we have a 100% forecast increase in demand between 2008 and 2043, and alongside that we can treble the capacity of the West Coast Main Line. That is not an immediate capacity crunch. There are more urgent priorities for our railways. There are some very slow lines, like Liverpool to Manchester, average 45 miles an hour, slower than 100 years ago. There are some very slow journey times if you're trying to go cross-country, say from the East Coast up to the north, because of very poor connection times. There are more overcrowded lines, like commuter lines, the south and the southwest lines, into London. There's an urgent need for electrification up to Sheffield, to Swansea, to Penzance, which will do much more for more people for a lower cost and will encourage people out of their cars and onto trains. Those in favour of HS2 have glibly said, well, of course we can do both. But let me tell you, we are not going to do both. Already, Theresa Villiers has said that there is a big question mark about doing the full Northern Hub at £500 million. So it's unlikely, it seems to me, that we will be able to do all of the things that really need to be done, the real priorities, and HS2. Finally, the fifth point. The Transport Select Committee have asked for an overall transport strategy. We need, as Andrea has said, we need to integrate railway with aviation and with with roads. And in the current plan, there is a striking lack of connectivity. So you go to Old Oak Common where it doesn't directly connect with Heathrow. You go to the Birmingham interchange where you have to get another train in order to connect to the high-speed train. That means people from Coventry have to take 3 trains to get to London if they're going the high-speed route. You go to Birmingham and you arrive at Curzon Street, and it's 19 minutes, check it on Google, 19 minutes to walk from Curzon Street to New Street where you can continue your journey. So you can travel to Birmingham at an average speed of 130 miles an hour on HS2, and then you have 19 minutes at an average speed of 3 miles an hour with your luggage, probably in the rain, which really loses the advantages of speed that you might have. We are different from France and Spain. We are more densely populated, our cities are closer to the capital, they're closer together. What we need is a system to connect up our cities on a reasonably high-speed line. And it turns out we already have that. It's called the West Coast Main Line, and it's already designated high speed, and in fact we can increase the speed somewhat with something called in-cab signalling. So they could be somewhat faster. And on the East Coast Main Line we can perhaps get up to 150, 160 miles an hour in stretches on the current track. So it seems to me to conclude that we are about to commit 45 billion net cost, according to the taxpayer allowance figures, Adam Smith Institute say 50 billion, in order to progress on a very high-risk scheme, which is the equivalent of dozens of Millennium Domes around Justine Greening's neck. Surely this should not be rushed. It should be part of a cross-party overall transport strategy. There is no immediate capacity crunch, so there is time to deal with the real rail priorities and then see what actually does happen to demand, which will change as technology changes and other things begin to replace rail travel. And we should set aside politics and vanity and do what is right for the UK, for the taxpayer and for the economy. Thank you.